I need to tell you something I've never said out loud before, something that's been eating me alive for months now. The night I stopped being the wife everyone thought I was lying right next to my husband, and he had no idea what I was doing just inches away from him. My name is Sarah. I'm 34 years old. And for the past 8 years, I've been married to a man who treats me like a piece of furniture in our own home. We live in a comfortable house in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, with our 6-year-old daughter, Emma, and from the outside, everything looks absolutely perfect. But I'm here to tell you what nobody sees. What happens when the bedroom door closes and the lights go out? When I'm left alone with my thoughts and this overwhelming emptiness that's been growing inside me like a cancer. It all started about 3 years ago, right after Emma started preschool. My husband Daniel got promoted to regional manager at his company, and suddenly he was traveling constantly, coming home exhausted, always glued to his phone even during dinner. The conversations between us became shorter and shorter, reduced to logistics about our daughter's schedule, bills that needed to be paid, repairs the house needed. We stopped talking about dreams, about us, about anything that actually mattered. And physically? Well, let's just say that our intimate life went from occasional to practically non-existent. At first, I tried to convince myself this was normal, that all married couples go through phases like this, that the passion naturally fades with time and responsibilities. I threw myself into being the perfect mother, the perfect homemaker, organizing playdates for Emma, volunteering at her school, keeping the house spotless. But every night, when I climbed into bed next to Daniel and he immediately turned his back to me, already scrolling through his phone or simply closing his eyes without even saying goodnight, I felt something inside me dying a little more. And if you're watching this thinking you'd never let yourself get to this point, please hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, it happens more gradually than you think. And this story is only just beginning. The loneliness became unbearable. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake for hours staring at the ceiling while Daniel snored peacefully beside me, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was slowly disappearing. I began to wonder if he even noticed me anymore, if I had become invisible in my own marriage. I'd catch myself looking in the mirror, seeing a woman who was still young, still attractive, still full of life, and wondering where she had gone wrong, what she had done to deserve this emotional abandonment. That's when I started doing something I'm not proud of, something that started innocently enough but quickly became an obsession. I began watching romantic movies late at night after Daniel fell asleep, and somehow I stumbled into watching content that was more mature, more explicit. I'm not talking about anything extreme, just people experiencing the kind of passion and connection I hadn't felt in years. And one night, lying there in the dark with Daniel breathing heavily beside me, completely unconscious, I did something I'd never done in our marriage. I touched myself right there, while he slept inches away from me. The guilt hit me immediately, like a punch to the stomach. What kind of wife does this? What kind of person seeks satisfaction alone while their partner sleeps next to them, completely unaware? But underneath that guilt was something else. Something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. I felt alive. I felt like I existed, like I mattered, like I was more than just a mother and a housekeeper and a ghost in her own home. This became my shameful secret. 2-3 times a week, I'd wait until Daniel was deep asleep, and I'd give myself what he no longer seemed interested in giving me. Each time, the guilt would crush me the next morning when I'd look at him over breakfast, making small talk about the weather while Emma chattered about her day at school. But each night, the loneliness would overwhelm the guilt, and I'd find myself doing it again. If you're still with me, thank you for not judging, and please consider subscribing because this story takes a turn I never saw coming, and I need you to hear what happened next. Everything changed about 6 months ago when Daniel's company hired a new IT consultant named Marcus. Daniel mentioned him casually one evening, saying this guy was going to be working from our home office twice a week to upgrade their systems, and I thought nothing of it. The first time Marcus showed up at our door, I was wearing old jeans and one of Daniel's oversized shirts, my hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, looking exactly like what I was, a tired housewife who'd given up trying to be anything else. Marcus was younger than us, maybe 29 or 30, with dark eyes that actually looked at me when he spoke, not through me or past me, but right at me like I was a real person worth seeing. He smiled when I offered him coffee, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and said thank you in a way that made me realize how long it had been since anyone had shown me that kind of simple courtesy. We made small talk while he set up his equipment in Daniel's office, and I found myself laughing at something he said, actually laughing, and the sound felt foreign coming from my own mouth. Over the following weeks, Marcus's visits became the highlight of my otherwise monotonous routine. I started paying more attention to my appearance on the days he was scheduled to come over. Nothing too obvious, just wearing nicer clothes, putting on a little makeup, actually brushing my hair instead of throwing it up carelessly. We'd chat during his coffee breaks, and those conversations went deeper than anything I'd experienced in years. He asked me about myself, about what I liked to do, about who I was before I became Emma's mom and Daniel's wife. Questions nobody had asked me in so long I'd forgotten there were answers. I told myself it was just friendship, just innocent conversation with someone who treated me like a human being. But I knew I was lying to myself. I knew it when I started counting down the days until his next visit. I knew it when I felt my heart race every time the doorbell rang on his scheduled days. I knew it when I caught myself thinking about him during the day, during dinner with my family, during those long nights lying next to my oblivious husband. And he knew it too. I could see it in the way his eyes lingered on me a fraction of a second too long, in the way our hands would accidentally brush when I handed him his coffee, and neither of us would immediately pull away, in the way the air in the room seemed to change when we were alone together. Please don't click away yet, because what I'm about to tell you is where everything fell apart, where I crossed a line I never thought I'd cross, and I need you to understand how it happened, so hit that subscribe button if you want to hear the rest. One Tuesday afternoon, Daniel texted me saying he'd be home late, stuck in meetings until at least 8 o'clock. Emma was at a birthday party that would keep her occupied until 6. Marcus was in the office working, and I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, my hands moving automatically while my mind wandered to dangerous places. I kept thinking about those nights with Daniel sleeping beside me, about how I'd become so desperate for human connection that I'd resorted to pleasuring myself while my husband lay unconscious next to me. And suddenly, I was crying, actual tears streaming down my face, and I couldn't stop them. I didn't hear Marcus come into the kitchen. His voice, soft and concerned, asking if I was okay, startled me so badly I dropped the knife I was holding. He was there instantly, his hand on my shoulder, genuine worry in his eyes, and before I could stop myself, everything came pouring out. Not the shameful nights, not the specific details, but the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible, the slow death of being in a marriage where you're completely alone. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when I finally ran out of words, he did something that shattered whatever remained of my resolve. He hugged me. Not a quick, polite hug, but a real embrace, the kind where someone holds you like you matter, like you're precious, like you exist. I collapsed into that hug like a drowning person finding air, and we stood there in my kitchen, me sobbing into his shoulder, him whispering that I deserved better, that I deserved to be seen. When I finally pulled back, his hands remained on my arms, and we stood there looking at each other, and I knew exactly what was about to happen. I knew I should step back, should end this before it started, should protect my marriage and my family and everything I'd built. But I was so tired of being the good wife, the invisible woman, the person who sacrificed everything while receiving nothing in return. I kissed him. Or maybe he kissed me. Honestly, I don't even know who moved first because it felt like we moved together, like we were both pulled by the same desperate need. And that kiss was everything I'd been missing for years. Passion, desire, the feeling of being wanted, of being craved, of being seen and needed and chosen. We didn't sleep together that day. As much as I wanted to, as much as every cell in my body was screaming to continue, somewhere deep inside I still had a line I wasn't ready to cross. We pulled apart, breathing hard, both of us shaking, and Marcus looked at me with such intensity and said, "I need to leave before we do something you'll regret." But here's the thing. I didn't regret the kiss. I regretted that it had to end. If your heart is racing right now, mine was too, and it still races every time I think about what came next. So please subscribe to this channel because this story is about to get even more complicated. After Marcus left that day, I went through the motions of finishing dinner, picking up Emma from the party, greeting Daniel when he finally came home at 9 o'clock, exhausted and barely coherent. That night, lying next to him in bed, I didn't touch myself. I didn't need to. The memory of Marcus's kiss, the feeling of being desired, was enough to keep me awake for hours, my mind racing between guilt and exhilaration. Marcus and I didn't talk about the kiss. He came back for his next scheduled visit, and we were both professional, maybe too professional, the awkwardness hanging between us like a physical thing. But underneath that awkwardness was an electric current, a tension that made the air feel thick and charged. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. Every accidental touch felt intentional, and I knew we were both thinking about the same thing, remembering the same moment, wanting the same thing to happen again. It did happen again 2 weeks later. Daniel was traveling for 3 days, Emma was at school, and Marcus came over for what should have been a routine work visit. We lasted maybe 20 minutes before we were kissing again. But this time we didn't stop. This time I led him to the guest bedroom, far away from the bedroom I shared with Daniel, and I crossed that final line I'd been teetering on for months. I won't describe what happened in that room because that's not what this story is about. What I will tell you is that for the first time in years, I felt completely present in my own body, completely alive, completely seen. And when it was over, lying there with Marcus, I didn't immediately feel the crushing guilt I expected. Instead, I felt something else. I felt like myself again, like the woman I used to be before I became invisible, before I became a ghost in my own life. The guilt came later, of course. It came when I picked up Emma from school and she hugged me and called me the best mommy in the world. It came when Daniel called from his business trip and asked how my day was, and I lied and said it was fine, just the usual routine. It came in waves, crushing and relentless, but never quite strong enough to make me regret what I'd done. And here's where I need you to stick with me, because this is where it gets really complicated. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because the next part of this story will change everything you think you know about what happened. Marcus and I continued our affair for 3 months. We were careful, always meeting when Daniel was traveling or when we knew we had hours alone. We told ourselves we'd stop, that it couldn't continue, but neither of us had the strength to end it. For me, those stolen hours were the only time I felt truly alive, the only time I felt like someone actually wanted me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. But affairs don't stay secret forever, no matter how careful you think you're being. The signs were there if Daniel had been paying attention. Me actually caring about my appearance again, smiling for no apparent reason, having more energy, seeming happier. But Daniel wasn't paying attention because Daniel never paid attention. He was too busy with work, too absorbed in his own life to notice that his wife had completely changed. The person who noticed was my sister Rebecca. She came over unexpectedly one afternoon about 2 months into the affair, and something about the way I looked, the way I moved, the glow I couldn't quite hide, made her suspicious. She cornered me in the kitchen while Emma was playing in the backyard and asked me point blank if I was having an affair. I've never been a good liar, especially not with Rebecca, and my face must have given me away because she gasped, actually gasped, and grabbed my arm. I begged her not to say anything, told her she didn't understand, tried to explain about the years of loneliness, of feeling invisible, of dying slowly in a marriage that was already dead in everything but name. But Rebecca wasn't hearing it. She told me I had to end it immediately, that I had to think about Emma, about my family, about what this would do to everyone if it came out. And she was right, of course. I knew she was right. But knowing something and being able to do it are two completely different things. I promised Rebecca I'd end it, and I meant it when I said it. But when Marcus showed up for his next visit, I couldn't say the words. I couldn't end the one thing that made me feel human again. Rebecca gave me 2 weeks. She said if I didn't end the affair and tell Daniel about it myself within 2 weeks, she'd tell him herself. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to protect me from an even bigger explosion when it inevitably came out another way. But all I heard was an ultimatum, a deadline, a ticking clock counting down to the destruction of everything. If you're wondering what I did, if I ended it or if I continued, Please stay with me and subscribe to this channel, because the answer is more complicated than you think. I decided to tell Daniel, but not about the affair. I decided to tell him about us, about our marriage, about how lonely I'd been, about how we'd drifted so far apart I couldn't even remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. I thought if I could make him understand how bad things had gotten, maybe we could fix it. Maybe I could end the affair and actually save my marriage instead of just ending it. I planned it carefully, asked his mother to take Emma for the weekend, made a nice dinner, tried to create an environment where we could actually talk without distractions. When I started the conversation telling him I needed to discuss our relationship, he looked genuinely confused, like he had no idea there was anything wrong. And that's when I realized the true depth of the problem. Daniel didn't just not see me anymore, he didn't even realize he wasn't seeing me. I told him everything except Marcus. I told him about the loneliness, about feeling invisible, about lying awake at night, feeling like I was dying inside. I told him I felt more like his employee than his wife, that we'd stopped being partners and become just two people living in the same house managing the logistics of life. I cried. I begged him to understand, to fight for us, to show me he still cared. Daniel listened, and when I was done, he said something that broke my heart in a completely new way. He said, "I thought you were happy. You never said anything." As if it was my responsibility to point out that our marriage was dying, as if he bore no responsibility for noticing his wife's unhappiness. He apologized, said he'd been too focused on work, promised he'd try harder to be present. He hugged me, and I let him, but inside I felt nothing because I knew these were just words, that nothing would really change, that we'd fall back into the same patterns within weeks. And I was right. For about 10 days, Daniel made an effort. He came home earlier, put his phone away during dinner, asked me about my day, and actually listened to the answers. But by the second week, the old habits were creeping back in. The phone calls during dinner, the late nights at work, the exhaustion that left no energy for actual connection. We had sex once during those 2 weeks, and it was mechanical, perfunctory. Him going through the motions of physical intimacy without any real passion or connection. And afterward, I lay there thinking about Marcus and hating myself for it. Please don't stop watching now, because this is where everything I've told you so far comes crashing together in a way I never expected. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because you need to hear what happened next. My 2 weeks with Rebecca were almost up, and I still hadn't ended things with Marcus. I kept telling myself I would, kept planning the conversation in my head, but every time I saw him, every time we were alone, I couldn't do it. And Marcus knew something was wrong. He could see the stress, the conflict written all over my face, and one day he asked me directly what was going on. I told him about Rebecca, about the ultimatum, about my attempt to save my marriage with Daniel. And Marcus, sweet Marcus, who'd been so careful to never pressure me, never push for more than I could give, looked at me with such sadness and said, "I love you, Sarah. I'm in love with you. And I know I shouldn't be. I know this is wrong. But I can't help it. If you need to end this to save your marriage, I'll understand. But I need you to know that what we have isn't just an affair to me. It's real." Those words terrified me because they meant this wasn't just about physical need anymore. It wasn't just about filling a void or feeling seen. It meant real feelings, real consequences, real choices that would affect real lives. It meant I had to decide what I actually wanted, not just what I thought I should want. I went home that day and found Daniel working in his office, his back to me as always, focused on his computer screen. I stood in the doorway watching him, this man I'd promised to love forever, this man I'd built a life with, this man who'd given me the most precious gift in my daughter. And I felt nothing. No love, no passion, no connection, just a distant fondness like you'd feel for an old friend you'd grown apart from. That night, Rebecca called to remind me my time was up. She asked if I'd ended it, and I said yes because I knew she'd tell Daniel if I said no, and I needed more time to figure out what I actually wanted. But Rebecca knew me too well. She could hear the lie in my voice, and she said, "Sarah, I'm giving you 3 more days. If you don't tell him by Sunday, I will. I love you too much to watch you destroy your life like this." And here's where I need you to understand something. where I need you to really hear me, so please stay with me and subscribe if you haven't, because what I'm about to tell you might make you hate me, but I need you to understand the why behind it. I didn't end the affair. I didn't tell Daniel. Instead, I did something that might be even worse. I made a decision. I decided that I wanted out of my marriage not because of Marcus, but because I was dying in it. Marcus had shown me that I could feel alive again, that I was still capable of passion and connection and joy, but he wasn't the reason I wanted to leave. He was just the catalyst that forced me to see what I'd been refusing to see for years, that I was in a marriage that was killing me slowly, day by day, and I deserved better than that. But here's the thing. Deciding to leave and actually leaving are two very different things. There's Emma to think about, the house, the finances, the family, the friends, the life we've built together. Divorce isn't just about walking away from a person, it's about dismantling an entire existence and building a new one from scratch, and that's terrifying no matter how miserable you are in your current situation. So I made a plan. I would tell Daniel I wanted a divorce, but I wouldn't tell him about Marcus. What purpose would that serve except to hurt him more than necessary? The affair wasn't why I was leaving. The death of our marriage was. Marcus was just what made me realize I couldn't stay in death anymore, that I deserved to actually live. Sunday morning came, the day Rebecca said she'd tell Daniel if I didn't. I woke up early, my heart pounding, knowing what I had to do. Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee, and I walked in and said we needed to talk. And I told him I wanted a divorce, that I'd been unhappy for years, that we'd tried to fix it and it hadn't worked, that I thought we'd both be happier apart. The look on his face was pure shock, like I'd physically struck him. He kept saying he didn't understand, that things were getting better, that he'd been trying. And I had to explain that trying for 2 weeks after years of neglect wasn't enough, that the foundation of our marriage had eroded so completely that I didn't think it could be repaired. He cried, which broke my heart, because I did care about him even if I wasn't in love with him anymore. He begged me to reconsider, to try counseling, to give him another chance. And that's when Emma walked into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, asking what was wrong, why Daddy was crying. And I had to look at my baby girl and know that the decision I was making would change her entire life, would potentially hurt her in ways I couldn't even predict. And for a moment, I almost took it all back, almost said I'd stay, almost chose her stability over my own happiness. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because I realized that staying in a dead marriage wasn't protecting Emma. It was teaching her that this is what love looks like, that this is what she should accept in her own life someday. And I couldn't do that to her. If you're still with me, thank you. Because I know this is heavy. I know this is complicated. And I need you to hear the end of this story. So please subscribe if you haven't, because what happened next changed everything again. Daniel demanded to know if there was someone else, and I lied. I looked him in the eye and told him no, that this was about us, about our marriage, not about anyone else. And I could see Rebecca's number calling on my phone, and I knew she was calling to see if I'd told him. And I let it go to voicemail because I wasn't ready to deal with her judgment yet. Over the next few days, things were awful. Daniel alternated between begging me to reconsider and being angry, accusing me of giving up, of not trying hard enough. We told Emma that Daddy was going to get his own apartment for a while, trying to explain the unexplainable to a 6-year-old. She cried, asked if it was her fault, and I held her and promised her it wasn't, that we both loved her so much, that this was about Mommy and Daddy, not about her. I told Marcus what was happening, and his reaction surprised me. He wasn't happy or relieved or excited that I was leaving Daniel. Instead, he was worried, asked me if I was sure this was what I wanted, told me he didn't want to be the reason I broke up my family. And that's when I realized something. Marcus was a genuinely good person who'd made a bad choice with me, and he was struggling with the same guilt I was, maybe even more because he was the outsider breaking up a home. But here's the part that nobody expected. The part that makes this whole story even more complicated than it already is. About a week after I told Daniel I wanted a divorce, Rebecca called me, her voice strange, tight, and asked if she could come over. She arrived within 20 minutes, looking pale and shaken, and told me something that made my entire world shift on its axis. She'd done some digging, because that's what Rebecca does when she's worried about someone. And she'd found out that Marcus wasn't who I thought he was. He was married. Not separated, not in a bad marriage, not on the verge of divorce. Married to a woman named Jennifer, who lived 2 hours away in Raleigh, married for 6 years, with a 2-year-old daughter. I think I stopped breathing. Rebecca showed me the social media profiles, the wedding photos, the family pictures, all public, all easily accessible if I'd ever thought to look. Marcus had never mentioned a wife, never worn a ring, never given any indication that he had a whole other life in another city. He'd presented himself as single, as available, as someone who could actually be with me if circumstances allowed. I felt sick, physically ill, because I'd blown up my entire life for someone who'd been lying to me the entire time. I'd risked everything, hurt my husband, traumatized my daughter, become the kind of person I'd never thought I'd be. And it was all based on a lie. Marcus hadn't shown me love. He'd shown me what he showed his wife. What he probably showed every woman he had the opportunity to be with. I wasn't special to him. I was just available. Please stay with me. Please keep watching. Because I need you to know what I did next, how I handled this revelation. So hit that subscribe button because this story isn't over yet. I confronted Marcus that same day, showed up at the house where he was working, and demanded to know the truth. And he didn't even try to deny it. He looked resigned, almost relieved, like he'd been waiting for this moment. He admitted everything: the wife, the daughter, the lies. He said he'd never meant for things to go this far, that it had started as just attraction, just flirtation, and then it became something more. And by the time he realized how deep it was, he didn't know how to tell me the truth. I asked him if he'd actually meant it when he said he loved me. And he said yes, that he did love me, that he loved his wife too, that he was a coward who wanted both and knew he deserved neither. And I realized in that moment that I'd built my entire justification for leaving Daniel on a foundation of lies, that the person who'd made me feel seen and valued and alive was just another man who was using me for what he wanted without caring about the consequences for anyone else. I ended it right there, told Marcus to never contact me again, blocked his number, and went home to my demolished life. Daniel had already moved out, was already looking for lawyers, had already told his family and friends that I wanted a divorce. Emma was already showing signs of stress, having nightmares, clinging to me constantly. And I was left with the ruins of what I'd destroyed based on a lie. But here's the thing, and this is what I need you to understand. Finding out about Marcus's lies didn't change the truth about my marriage to Daniel. Yes, I'd been deceived. Yes, I'd made the decision to leave based partly on what I had with Marcus, but the underlying truth remained the same. My marriage to Daniel was dead long before Marcus came into the picture. I'd been lonely and invisible and dying in that marriage, and that was real, regardless of Marcus's lies. So I had a choice to make. I could go back to Daniel, admit what had happened, try to reconcile based on the fact that the affair was over and built on lies anyway. Or I could move forward with the divorce, accept the consequences of my choices, and build a new life without either of them. I spent weeks wrestling with this decision, talking to Rebecca, who'd gone from judging me to supporting me through the devastation, seeing a therapist who helped me untangle what was real from what was the affair, what was about Daniel from what was about Marcus. And here's what I realized. I didn't want to go back to Daniel, not because of Marcus, but because that marriage was killing me long before the affair started. The affair was wrong. It was a terrible choice. It was something I'll regret for the rest of my life. But it didn't create the problems in my marriage. It just exposed them, forced me to see what I'd been avoiding for years. I decided to go through with the divorce. I told Daniel the truth about the affair because he deserved to know, and his hurt and anger were so much worse than if I'd just left it at us growing apart. He called me names I'd never heard him use, told me Emma would know what kind of person I really was, threatened to fight me for custody. And I accepted it all because I knew I deserved his anger, that what I'd done was wrong even if the reasons behind it were complex. The divorce is still ongoing. It's messy and expensive and painful, and Emma is struggling with the changes, and there are days when I wonder if I made the right choice. If I should have just stayed and accepted that comfortable unhappiness instead of burning everything down. But here's what else is true. I'm not invisible anymore. I wake up in my small apartment, just me and Emma half the time, and I see myself in the mirror and I recognize the person looking back at me. I'm not happy exactly, not yet, but I'm not dying either. I'm alive, present, real, and that has to count for something. So now I'm asking you, because I genuinely don't know if what I did was right or wrong, if leaving a dead marriage justifies the way I did it, if feeling alive again is worth the damage I've caused to everyone around me. What would you do in my place? If you were dying slowly in a marriage, if you'd been invisible for years, if someone came along and made you feel seen again, would you have made the same choices? Would you have handled it better? Do I deserve happiness after what I've done? Or should I have just stayed in my comfortable misery? Please, tell me in the comments what you would have done, what you think I should do now. And if this story resonated with you in any way, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, please subscribe to this channel because you're not alone, and maybe together we can figure out how to navigate these impossible situations that life throws at us. Thank you for listening to my story, for not judging too harshly, or if you are judging, thank you for doing it anyway and hearing me out. What would you do in my place? I really need to know.